Now, welcome to our discussion phase. We have two guests today that have their own unique perspectives on Designer Baby. Our first guest is Louis Philippe, and our second guest is Gaia. So let's start with Louis Philippe. Could you introduce yourself a bit? Like, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Louis Philippe, and I'm an incoming student at McGill University in mathematics and computer science. And obviously, genetic engineering and designer babies are a topic of interest because they touch on so many ethical aspects and applied ethics. So it's very interesting as a debate for me and for society as well.
For sure, for sure. Gaia, could you please give yourself an introduction?
By all means. So, good day. Obviously, my name's Gaia Noseworthy. I'm a third-year student of mathematical physics at UNB with a few added focuses towards like kind of computer science, statistics, and biology. My goals in the future are to study genetic engineering as my research profession. And thus, I've done a decent amount of reading into the area, but definitely nowhere near enough as it stands. I also lead the debate club in my university and used to run a debate podcast. So I'm quite used to arguing this topic with a large number of people. So it's very interesting to kind of dig into it in a more formal sense for me.
Nice. All right. Here we will get right into the topic, so you guys can express your perspective upon this topic. So the first question I'm going to ask you guys is, how do you guys think designer babies will affect the future we live in? For this question, let's start off with Louis Philippe, and then we can just go on from there.
So of course, on this one, it's clear to see all the good potential of this technology. You know, you can cure any disease you want before someone is even born, but also it's a very slippery slope. Whereas someone could try to get more power, a country could secretly develop a human weapon. Or as we've seen in the novel Brave New World, you know, we're just kind of stratified society, and everyone is happy with their position in society, whether to the top of the hierarchy or to the bottom. And it's a very dystopic view of what could become society if we let genetic engineering or designer babies go maybe too far, uncontrolled. So there, of course, there's an aspect that can be very positive, but it can also be very negative. And I'm eager to hear Gaia on what may be those positive or negative, especially aspects, because that's what's maybe most interesting to forecast about the future, see what could happen if this goes bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have a few particular concerns about genetic engineering that I'm not really sure the validity of. So obviously, it's definitely been established either in previous talks or just naturally that for talking about the genome, we know the genome defines how humans are built, and then after humans are built, they're more defined by how they're nurtured in life. So you create a baseline and you can modify that over time without genetic engineering already. So for me, I don't see genetic engineering as a problem for something such as mind control or establishing a dictatorship exactly, but definitely creating a civilization of people that are either way too happy or unfocused on pushing forward or are very complacent would be fully possible, since that's an editable part. For me, I see this more likely as being a good thing overall. In particular, for me, I know many of the nations who are working on genetic engineering right now are quite democratic with a large number of oversight, except for a few choice nations, of course. But we also know that genetic engineering, first and foremost, is a medical technology. The big goal of genetic engineering is prevent cancers. That's the big thing that it's really good at right now. But it's also to prevent many genetic disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Crohn's, many allergies, and other deadly influences. So because it's a medical technology, it's going to be accessible to the poorer individuals in the nation, likely early on, meaning it's more like computers, it's likely never to be too exclusionary after it gets set up. So for me, I think it's primarily in the future going to be a medical technology, personally, and I think its uses are going to, I don't want to talk about trickle down because it's never been a good thing, but I think from the onset, due to its medical nature in countries like Canada and in much of the European Union, where healthcare is subsidized extremely for people and they have democratic oversight, we're going to see access to it early on from a multitude of people, and we're going to see a lot more oversight in these countries. So for me, I'm seeing a positive influence of creating humans that are stronger, smarter, faster, whatever, if you want to start singing the Daft Punk song. I think it's Daft Punk at least. But I think we're going to see improvements to humanity. And while we run risks of creating complacent humans, even though the genome defines how we are, I don't think it's good enough to create humans that are quote unquote brainwashed. So I don't see a Brave New World society, but I do see a complacent society as the big risk right now.
That's very interesting too that you bring the medical aspect of improving people's life, because probably, and the democratization of this technology, because one thing we might expect to is that chronic and costs a lot in healthcare. That's certainly a thing that will push designer babies, at least the good aspect of gene editing, forward.
Yeah, for me, I can see the biggest risk of genetic engineering not being genetic engineering is you can edit a person who's already alive with genetic engineering. Don't get me wrong. You can change any feature about a person who's already born with a little added difficulty in genetic engineering. So designer babies don't have a distinct advantage. Just they do initially, but that advantage goes away quickly. My biggest issue is just standard discrimination and racism and many of the other phobias and hatreds that people have are going to resurface due to this. And how we overcome that as a society for essentially the second time in modern history is going to be a big question, because we're already seeing that we can barely handle the differences that already exist in real life. So that to me is the big problem, is essentially modern day eugenics. If we can get past that, this is essentially a medical technology that is also customized evolution, which has infinitely positive possibilities, but we have to get past the racism. And I guess we're going to see evolutionism, or evolutionophobia, becoming a big thing due to this, because there's always a pushback in these technologies. So
yes, indeed, well, we see with pretty much anything new that goes out, there will be some recess from the population.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of individual groups who are very against genetic engineering, and while we're not going to call out any individual group because that's its own problem, right? It is curious to see how these groups are going to react. Even some of these groups are dwindling and some are growing more powerful. Like, look at vaccines right now. We see a huge anti-vax movement throughout most of the Western nations. When you ask why, it's because many people see vaccines as unnecessary nowadays, and the internet has become its own, I can't remember the term, but its own like reflecting bubble for thoughts that are quite toxic. And then you can spread an ideology such as anti-vaccinationism, I guess I'm going to call it anti-vaxism, and have an infinite amount of people supporting you in your claim, even though it's just emotional support. So this bubble that can be created is a huge risk, in that we're like, vaccines are controversial. How is literally editing humans from the genome going to be? That's my big worry.
It's of course again, I feel very much more controversial, but it's also interesting to I think we both agree on the fact that gene editing would be a positive technology for most people in the world right now. But it's also interesting, I find, to look at some arguments of those that are against maybe gene editing, and namely maybe the nature of being a human and part of the biological world. There's some kind of a randomness to being here and who I am, a bit of the magic of life, if we put it quote unquote. So what do you make of maybe the aspects of control? Because I feel it's not a bad thing, but I definitely understand why it bugs out some people.
Yeah,
the goal of science is to kind of like explain, describe, predict, and control. That's just also an extension of what we're doing with scientific research.
Yeah, I think that actually goes into whatever the next question is going to be, like the ethics of everything.
So you guys mentioned the ethics and genetic racism. I want to transitioning into our other topic really quickly. Do you guys think that designer babies would create a bigger economic gap between the rich and the poor, as the rich would be able to get the more expensive, the more premium genes, whereas the poor would basically be in genetic lottery at that point? Or how do you guys interpret that? And then we can roll this over to ethics and designer baby.
Yeah, so I'll take LP's question about is it ethical to do it in the first place, and then kind of talk about wealth disparity. So if we're talking about the ethics of controlled evolution, that actually is a very good question about genetic engineering, and one that's we're still trying to answer is it right to edit people, right? And to me, I think that that's a three-parter question. And the first part is it right to edit people for medical reasons, to prevent cystic fibrosis, to prevent a person from suffering through clinical depression and maybe scoliosis, maybe schizophrenia, psychosis, many other physical and mental ailments. And I think it's very clear that the goal of our medical system is to do no harm or do as little harm as possible. So it's a pretty easy question. Yeah, it is ethical to edit a human being to prevent diseases. That's essentially what we do already. And the only fight back against that is currently the anti-vax movement, who thinks that vaccines give you autism, which that's a different discussion. But the two other pieces is it right to edit people for physical benefit? And is it right to edit people for aesthetics? And that's a question that's much harder to answer. Is it right to make humans smarter, to make them stronger, to make them able to eat more food without gaining unhealthy levels of weight, or to be able to survive better on lower amounts of food? Is it better to make us able to handle temperatures or going underwater? And that's to me, a hard question to answer, because I would say yes. I would say as humans, our goal needs to be to do everything we can to make the world work for us and us to work for the world, to make all animals, plants, and everything else survive and be as healthy as possible, and to keep the most number of humans successful. And with the growth of AI and other major risks, increasing human intelligence is probably a big thing. Increasing physical strength is good in a world where processed foods dominate. Increasing our abilities to survive underwater might be good if global warming becomes an even larger issue, right? Especially since if we could live underwater, that opens opportunities to building countries underwater, which would be a very weird development, but also positive if we want to go to a planet like, I think Europa is mostly water, the moon, many other planets. So there's that. But then there's aesthetics. And the question is it right to edit a baby for aesthetics? And my answer to that is you can edit an adult for aesthetics. So, I mean, yeah, but that's like asking, is it okay to pierce a baby's ears? And I'm pretty against that. So, I don't know. I think I'll leave that question to LP. I'll let you kind of answer everything.
There's a notion of I find control in what you bring, in a sense that you can edit an adult for aesthetics, but it's usually the adult himself or herself that decides to go in for aesthetics treatment, whereas a baby is definitely imposed upon the baby the aesthetics aspects of that they're going to have later on in life. So I feel for me there's a clear boundary, and if we come back to what we said before, of the ideal human, well, maybe if we accept that people are edited for aesthetic reasons, well, you're kind of gonna get that narrowing of visual appearances in the population, and who knows, you might be living in a world of someday clones of everyone very, very physically similar. Well, who knows? For us right now, it's bad because personally, I find diversity like incredibly interesting. But some other might have very different views on that. As for what you said on increasing capacities, that I think that it won't be a problem if I can maybe bridge the gap to what we said also on the ethics, and maybe move on that if it's done ethically. Because of course, if it's not democratized and accessible to everyone, you're gonna get inequalities rising and rising. But if experts and ethicists from all fields across discuss on the topic and come to clear guidelines as to who, well, at least to make sure that everyone can access it equally, and I guess like pretty much anything, there is going to be an illegal market maybe for for gene editing, so people might profit of that. Again, so I guess we can't avoid that. But if it's done ethically and democratically, it's going to be a benefit for everyone, because society as a whole will have just better people to fuel, say, the expansion of humans, and also fuel the well-being of you said it, humans, plants, animals. living on this planet, and many others maybe. So Shaw, does that answer the question that was asked?
Yeah,
Maybe
for
present you to
sure.
the other topic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
And
loving the responses here. Sorry to interrupt you there, guy.
yeah, no
But
worries.
humans living underwater. What did you say, Louis? The black market for designer babies. This is the kind of
Yeah.
this is the kind of critical analysis that we're trying to encourage in this show. So I just want to say that I really appreciate it. Just before we move on from this topic, like, how do you guys feel about like commercializing like the genetic research for designer babies? Because that would also increase the scientific research, like the motivation to do it if there's money involved. Obvious. How do you guys feel about that? I'm just being devil's advocate here.
Yeah, I'll touch on a few of those things. So the first one, I want to talk a little bit more about the aesthetic part because I forgot to mention one thing.
Okay.
The aesthetic part's a very weird question because in real life we say don't put a tattoo on a baby, don't pierce a baby's ears because those are permanent decisions that could harm them, right? But genetic engineering is reversible because, well, you can edit an adult, so you can reverse the editing. So it kind of leads to that question of if it's fully reversible and non-harmful, is it bad? And because we're also going to see, for example, in many societies we see culture movements, counterculture movements, where people work towards being more unified, and then people work to being more individualist. So would this show up in babies 15 years later? In that if they represent their counterculture or their pro-culture movements in their babies, right? And that would be a very interesting thing to think about because if a lot of babies born from counterculture might look towards being a little more the same, and babies born looking towards being the same might be pushed towards doing their own counterculture movement and editing themselves as they grow. So it's a very unique thing. And
Is it possible to genetically edit someone as you grow?
yes, it is. It's harder because you need to restart a few of the body's processes, but it's not impossible to do that. It's much like how if you have a person who's transgendered or a transsexual individual. Look, I'm trans and I don't know the correct terms. It's not an easy topic. But a person who's going through hormone therapy will go through puberty again, right? That's essentially the process described as if a guy begins getting hormone injections to increase, if a person gets hormone injections to increase estrogen, they will begin to grow breast tissue, and they'll see many puberty changes that a cisgendered girl would go through at around age 13. So you can restart bodily processes to reverse and edit changes, which is beneficial, but it's not as easy as editing the genome before they're born, of course. But for inequality and the devil's advocate of commercialization, that's an interesting one for me. Because, for example, gene editing is cheap. CRISPR itself, you could do a full CRISPR experiment on $200. You can go buy a kit online right now and do a CRISPR experiment on yourself to increase your muscle mass. It's
Really?
that easy and it's legal. There's no laws against that. And I have a friend who was considering doing just that just to see if he could, right? So it's fully possible to do that. And so there's not even a black market. It's just a legal market at this point. And for increasing inequality, I don't think inequality is going to be a problem. I think it's going to be closer to tattoos because there's so much money to be made by selling this really cheap method for just a 200% markup and making a ton of profits off the general population. So commercialization for this might actually be a good way of preventing the inequality, but also creating an inequality at the same point. But it would create the standard wealth inequality instead of gene inequality, right?
For sure. What do you think?
If it becomes a market, you're gonna get top tier products and low tier products. Maybe you can expect from that.
It's so easy to commercialize it. You could commercialize it like you could phones or tattoos, right? In that better genes are not going to be extremely inaccessible because, well, they're so cheap to make. You mark this stuff up like insulin, which that's also a controversial topic that many countries mark up insulin by about 7,000% in the United States right now. But it's because it's so cheap to do, it would be very easy to sell it to the standard populace with huge markups and make profits. So it would be a bad idea as a company to limit them like gold watches, like Swiss watches. They're so cheap to do. If you hit a large audience, everyone's going to want their baby to be perfect. And I don't think I've ever met a parent who didn't want their child to be perfect, at least any half decent parent. So and a lot of parents would laugh this up, especially during that late pregnancy, early birth phase where they have that extreme emotional connection and desire for pure success for their child. So.
And if I can maybe move on to something else, when we spoke of underwater humans
Oh
and
yes.
all the things, all the things we could do, that kind of raised a question in my mind of to what point would it be something else than a human? Because if you start from the base of a human and you transform it, and you transform it, like it's like the question of you put grains of sand one by one. At what point do you get a pile of sand?
Yeah, it's kind of like the
It's
Theseus ship problem as well. Yeah.
so could we at some point end up with something that's if we
Not human.
just yeah
Not
you
human?
need so if I maybe add myself as I don't like grow myself a sixth finger on each end, well I'm still human, but if I have
Yeah.
a better brain, like a higher IQ, I'm still human.
Yeah. But it's a question because species are usually defined by the ability to reproduce when with each other, right? So if a human is no longer able to reproduce with another human, there is a species difference between them. But they could both also reproduce with the same person in between. So that means there's a weird spot that has never happened evolutionarily before, as far as we know. So
And
it's a good
maybe
question.
maybe also with IVF, you could get two beings that cannot reproduce by themselves, but with technologies could have technically a child.
Yeah, and that's also a good question is we're going to reach a point where we can modify babies before they're born and create artificial fertilization with in vitro fertilization, IVF, that doesn't matter anymore if humans can reproduce with each other. If all humans are better off being born through in vitro and getting the modifications necessary to edit their genome. Because a lot of gene changes you make to a person are non-transferable to their child. But if you make a person able to breathe underwater, they can probably pass that gene on. So what happens if they get a half gene for breathing underwater? What happens to the baby? The general response is probably going to be edit the baby to prevent that from happening, and just don't ask that question, right? So it is like I think the question's not even will we create humans that can't reproduce. I think that's a given. It's is that bad, and should we worry about a point where they're no longer human if in the end we're still using in vitro and we're still modifying before they're born?
That will raise certainly interesting questions again about maybe not just what it means to be humans, because we said it won't matter anymore, but maybe to understand more about consciousness, and that might be something that everyone, like every derivatives of initial humans being maybe share, and that may be a common unifier of the spectrum of what humanity is. And it was a question about identity, of course, also.
Yeah, because with modification, for example, we could create humans that can better breathe in like methane enriched environments. We could create humans that could we could design humans that could survive car crashes or even plane crashes, right? Humans that can breathe underwater, humans that could theoretically fly if we do hollow bones. Like it gives us the question of each planet that we colonize in the future will require separate edits just for pure survival. So humans are going to have to be different for survival in the future if we're going to leave Earth, which many people think that is the ultimate goal right now. So it does kind of give me the question of, should we be calling these new species, or should we just say humans are defined by their fact that they have consciousness and the ability to create new life as they wish? Is it time to stop defining humans as a species and define humans as a mental categorization and the ability to play God?
Something that might something that also might be of interest. It just popped up to my mind, but like Descartes' citation of "I think, therefore I am." And maybe that could be a basis of what it means to be human. If you can consider yourself a human,
then you are.
Then you are. Yeah, if you have the ability to ask yourself and consider yourself a human, then you are. But again, I'm just juggling with ideas there. I think it's a very interesting where we've gone from.
Yeah, because if we can create anything, does it matter what we call it anymore? It's a living being that we've created who can think, act, and breathe, or maybe not even breathe. Maybe they can synthesize. Maybe they can have the ability to take in oxygen through pores in their skin, and they don't need lungs. that would be a possibility to create. So it leads me to the question that I know this is super sci-fi at this point, but this could be a reasonable question within 100 years. Is it worth it to define species, or is it just worth it to define consciousness as the part we care about and the ability to recreate instead of procreate?
There's also a giant move. So this is obviously, as we know right now in society, evolution hasn't been as significant anymore just because of our sheer population. So this might be a way that evolution might continue in the future. People talk about how humans are going to evolve. And if you've read the book Homo Sapiens and its sequel Homo Deus, they talk about this, and they also mention technological evolution. So I have a feeling that technological evolution integration with humans and evolution through genetics and designer babies, there's going to be a time where they clash, and we're gonna see which one's better. So
technological evolution is known as transhumanism, if you ever just want a good word to throw in there for it. And it is a good question of at what point is editing technologically better or worse than editing physically. And I think there's a worry that they'll clash, but I think my biggest thing is I think they can support each other, because there are things genetic engineering is bad at or can't do, and those things are exactly what transhumanism can do.
Yeah. That's what I want to study when I grow up: technological evolutionary changes in humans.
Yeah, they're two sides of the same coin, and they both help each other, but they're seen as very different things right now. And I'm kind of hoping to see that a mind shift in that those are not two different things. There are two different pieces of the same puzzle. They both lead to the same goal of creating something better than what it was before, and to use the rapid growth of technology to make humans and other species better.
I think you guys have probably seen the movie Ready Player One, right? Where
haven't actually.
I haven't either.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it's that movie.
Nice meme.
They literally, it's a video game, right? And they can take off arms and sell it, and then they could put machine guns inside their shoulder and stuff. So obviously this is very sci-fi, but in 100 years from now, considering how technology advances in an exponential rate, I could see myself upgrading my hand with new technology, and wearing Google glasses inside my brain or something.
I think in the end, what we're going to end up seeing is humans who have a genetically modified brain and a physically modified body using non-biological parts.
Yeah,
but I think we're going to use genetic engineering to create humans that can be modified efficiently, because
technologically,
because for example, human parts break easier than mechanical parts, but having mechanical parts eventually is the better decision. But you can't start off with that, right?
Or maybe we can.
Maybe we could just grow a brain.
I think we're gonna have to modify our genetics in order to easily incorporate with technology. I feel like that would be the end goal.
And there's also the fact that
new species.
The human brain is excellent. It can do comparisons and logical deductions and reasoning better than any other computer in existence. But it can't do logical reasonings that well. It can't follow a line of simple rules to come to a solution. Hence why mental math is so difficult. But if I told you a story, you could think of 37 alternate endings before I finish my sentence.
Because of its abstractness.
Because that's what the human brain's good at. But there's the idea in transhumanism that we could create an 8th layer of the neocortex, so the outer end of the brain that makes us human, that can handle those logical reasonings and make humans supercomputers with abstract reasoning, which that would make humans better than AI. Officially, which is a very interesting thing, that genetic engineering doesn't exist in absentia. It doesn't exist in a void. It is a piece of a puzzle that's going to be better humans. And in the end, a lot of these questions we do have to answer of the ethics of it. Will we see wealth inequality? Will we see damage done to people? Will we see the militarization or adaptation of this technology for less ethical purposes? And we're going to see it. But the thing about humanity is we have always prevailed in the end, and I don't think that's going to stop now.
I agree.
Yeah, that's I'd say hope for the best, but also expect the worst. In the way
the best mentality.
Because I'm also convinced that there will be some things going sideways, and but it's our ability to recover from that and learn from that as we did in the past, that will decide, whether or not maybe we're worthy of having such technologies.
Yeah.
And from using them in the future.
And I think the one thing about humans and technological advancements for humans is not how spectacular advancements are, but how unspectacular that they turn out to be. In that, let's look at what we're using a computer for. We're talking to each other about genetic engineering. These computers haven't revolutionized, they've revolutionized the world, but in a way that feels just regular
For
to
sure.
us. And
We're
I think
also
that's going to be exactly what continues to happen.
we're
It's always happened,
also
always will.
in different parts of the country. We're all like hundreds of kilometers away from each other, but we can have these discussions by just like
Yeah,
as we're face to face with
it's a
each other.
spectacular change that to us is just regular life. We have created the magnificent and made it utterly ordinary.
In
And I
less
think
than 30 years. That's amazing.
yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see going forward with genetic engineering. It's going to be a magnificent, massive change that is revolutionary. There's nothing ever like it, nor will there ever be anything like similar to it in the future. But it will become utterly ordinary. It will feel just like a regular thing, like a tattoo.
There was
And
controversy for computers too when they first came out.
of course, there's
Yeah.
controversy about how we send wireless signals in the air from 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Every single one of them has had massive scares from groups of people who don't understand them. And that's not going to change. But in the end, your cell phone signal is utterly unspectacular. It is one of the greatest inventions of all time, the culmination of all human knowledge. And all you think about your cell signal is how annoying it is when you don't have it.
Do you guys feel that every piece of technology, like this isn't like designer babies and genetic engineering, isn't it's a concern for sure, but it's like the two sides of a coin. Like even with nuclear fission, obviously there's like that part where it can be horrible and weaponized, but there's also the part that gives you energy for thousands of years.
Mhm.
Do you guys feel that designer babies is gonna be more about like how responsible we are? I know Louis Philippe was getting into this too, like
Yeah,
more
I'll
of a
leave the ground open for him.
more of a responsibility thing rather than like you can't judge science for being as
Science?
good or bad. It's just a neutral like construct, just as a
It's just a
material is.
tool.
It's just a tool. So do you think it's
Science
more
discovers. That's it.
exactly? And most scientists that work on it are doing it for the betterment of society. So do you guys think the key to solving this is having a tight leash on like capitalistic endeavors of this and making sure that like it's not being used for wrong so we learn from our mistakes? Or how do you guys think this is also transitioning into our third question? Sorry, Louis, you could just answer it, but the third question is what kind of laws would you incorporate in order to allow for the ethics and the science of the designer babies to kind of go in harmony with each other? So this is a perfect transition into that. So I'll let you
Sounds
start
good.
it off,
All you.
Louis.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks. I think that capitalism and the private sector won't be a break from all the ethics of this, but rather maybe um, a push, because if everyone is well educated, I feel it's like with AI, if everyone is educated and understand what's at stakes with their data and their bodies and the bodies of their children, there will be some enlightened choices and decisions, and a demand for ethical research and ethical use of those technologies. My fear would not be so much with the private sector rather than maybe governments could try to work in secrets. And I mean, I'm no conspiracy theorist, but like countries who have been like have a reputation for hiding some weaponization or weapon development, that could also be become a problem. Unethical research and also unethical development of so-called human weapons. I think that would be my biggest fear, probably bigger than seeing genetic engineering for ethical, not ethical, but aesthetic purposes. I feel that is dwarfed by maybe my fear of seeing humans use that and engineered to become weapons.
We're gonna be
That being
making Captain
said,
America's here.
that being said, if we maybe to answer the question as to the laws, I think that there should be a reflection always when we use a technology, and that could apply to designer babies as well as anything. Will it be uh, for the greater good in the end, and also in respect of human dignity? in the way that, as we mentioned, not favor obedience, but rather free will and free choice, and respect like basic qualities that makes us human.
Mhm.
So if that's taken into account and put forward in discussions and considerations in making decisions, I think I'd feel safer.
Yeah, and I kind of am going to build on that in that. So I actually I do agree with that, and I kind of want to bring up that in particular, neither the private sector nor the public sector are enemies. Capitalism is not an enemy, nor is socialism. The enemy is totalitarianism brought upon by abuses of power. Whether it's private or public or from some third party, like religious even, the problem is the coalition of power amongst a single group, and that group will use the power for their own personal gain and at the detriment of other people. So for me, my biggest thing with genetic engineering is public oversight, multiple checks and balances, distribution of powers, and the standard things that you need to implement to ensure that a system can't be abused is the same thing here. But it's also important to remember that genetic engineering is only one piece of the puzzle, and your genes don't define your compliance. They can define your comfort, and they can define your happiness in life. They can make you stronger and smarter. But a smarter population is less likely to put trust in a government. Don't get me wrong. A smarter population would be able to run a safer government by most definitions. But you can't use genetic engineering to make the perfect weapon that will only do what you say. At least as far as I can tell, unless you want to completely destroy their intelligence and somehow find a way to breed pure compliance towards one person in them, which is at that point you're training a dog, and you would probably be better off genetically modifying a dog to do that. If we're going to be honest here. So for me, general oversight is important, but in the end, this is a tool, and it's as much of a tool as anything else that we use in the modern day. Your cell phone is as much of a tool as genetic engineering. It's essentially a tattoo that's also a medical treatment, an aesthetic treatment, the ability to improve your life for the better, all in one. So it needs the oversight of all of those things, depending on what you're trying to do with it. And letting a person modify themselves is obviously the worst possible idea right now. But so again, oversight. But
that's your name.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'll say it till I can't speak anymore. Is that my biggest thing is that there's always an independent group of watchdogs, and there are multiple independent groups to ensure that things are being done ethically and done appropriately. But in the end, this covers every area of law that we currently have. It's not just medical. It's not just aesthetic. It's not just enhancement. It's not just drugs. It is in similar to drugs and the effects that it can have on you if you desire that, right? So to me, it's a bit of everything, and we need to, depending on what you're doing with it, you need to watch it differently. And that I'm not worried about creating a human weapon, because in the end, a stronger human is likely going to become a smarter human from the same edits. And if you're just trying to make them stronger, that's still beneficial to the individual. You're not going to take away someone's individuality with this. And if you find a way to, well, we have oversight to prevent that. If other countries, at least, if we find a way to unify the world more appropriately, hopefully we'd have overarching government bodies that can prevent these things as well. So
I think I got too afraid maybe from reading Brave New World twice over before this podcast.
Yeah, I've read Brave New World. I've read 1984 and many other books like it. They're all scary, but I don't think genetic engineering is the threat for that. Now, I think
totalitarianism is, as you said.
Totalitarianism is. And honestly, if I was to choose the one I'm more scared of, I would choose transhumanism, the use of technology to modify humans, because that you can actually stick something onto someone's brain to control impulses and to create custom impulses, right? I would be more scared of that than I would be genetic engineering, because you can't really do that with genetic engineering without it being easier technologically at the very least. So for genetic engineering, I see it as unequivocally it's going to be positive. It will have problems, but its problems are the same problems with vaccines at this point, or like a vaccine tattoo that also makes you smarter, right? But transhumanism, modification through technology, well, humans are very good at creating custom technology, so that's what I'm scared of.
I guess that would make a very nice topic for an next podcast.
Episode,
maybe, Shaw.
That's my dream, I am gonna make human cyborgs. Like, that's what I'm researching in biomechanics. So I will that's definitely something that we can talk about for our next podcast. If anyone
I think that's the more
this,
dangerous one.
If anyone watching this has suggestions too, just leave them down in the comments, and we will probably go look at them, and you could possibly be in our discussions next time, So for sure. To wrap this up, wait, Louis Philippe, sorry, do you have anything to say, or are you?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Awesome. So to wrap this up, I just want to confirm that like your final statement for genetic engineering is that it's like a tool. So it depends on who uses it, but the concept itself isn't right or wrong. It's how you use it that determines if it's right or wrong.
Yeah. And
Okay.
that I don't think it's the most dangerous tool we have, and I don't think it will be the most dangerous tool we have. I think on the grounds of the fact that we have nuclear weaponry, I think genetic engineering is quite light.
That's very true. Anything to add, Louis Philippe? Or?
No, it ties very much with what we've said. We've gone to great length, but we boiled it down to a nice conclusion, and maybe it was a bit foreseen because I guess most things in ethics with respect to new developments they boil down to this. It depends.
Yeah.
It always depends.
My biggest worry about technology is not it being spectacularly good or bad, but it being totally ordinary.
For sure. That's the beauty of science. It is a neutral tool out there for us to use however we want. And I feel like as we delve more into this oversight series, more topics are going to have the same conclusion of it depends, just like the genetic, for sure.
Yeah, I would label this one as one of our safer ones, but everything has its own risks. But thankfully, this one, I'm more worried of people trying to make stupid humans than super smart humans.
For sure. Do you guys have any final remarks or comments to add, or?
I think we've touched on everything. If you're looking for further resources that are publicly accessible, the YouTube channels Kedskatsokt, which is in a nutshell in English, and CPG Grey are both good resources that cite their sources. So if you're looking for first point for learning further about this, that's usually where I point people.
Awesome.
And for that matter, for learning anything, Kedskatsokt is also very, very nice. That cover many topics, so I guess we're making them free publicity.
Yeah, well, Kedskatsokt deserves it. They're a genius channel. And keep in mind, we didn't even touch on this fact, but genetic engineering also could create theoretically infinite life, that you could never die. And that's my point of research for it. That's my goal. Yeah, so that's an interesting piece that we didn't get to, but yeah, genetic engineering could essentially allow you to live forever, because aging is the building of hormones to sustain damage. You fix both those things, you live forever. So that would be another interesting topic in the future of, is it ethical or appropriate to let a person live forever? But if you're looking to read more into that, Kedskatsokt has touched on it best.
I was thinking about immortality. Anyways, we're gonna go on forever. We're gonna have to end this.